My name is Isaac Bailey. I'm a pharmacist intern here at Chief Andrew Isaac. I will be showing you how to get 7 doses out of the Pfizer vials here today for this video. And there's some technique to it. So before we draw up the vaccine that's diluted, we've found that the low dead space syringes, you can usually get 7 doses with those as opposed to regular luer lock syringes. Those tend to waste anywhere between 40 to 100 microliters with every syringe, so it adds up by the 7th dose. And so we like to use low dead space syringes, and we use Vantage points. The Vantage point has a little nub in the inside of the syringe with the plunger, and that reduces the dead space. Compared to the normal syringe, you don't usually have a little extra nub inside on that little piston portion of the syringe or plunger, and there tends to be some dead space in there that the vaccine just gets stuck in, so you just end up wasting that with every patient syringe that you draw up. So before dilution, it has been recommended by Pfizer that the undiluted vaccine sit out for maybe 5 minutes to reach room temperature, and really 5 minutes should be enough since it's a small volume, but they also recommend that it should be diluted within 2 hours of reaching room temperature. So there's a little time that it could sit out. So we'll just start from the very beginning. We have all the supplies we need to dilute the Pfizer vial. So we have vaccine here, that's live vaccine. We have a normal saline with no preservative. We have a 3 milliliter syringe so we're using the DPS syringes today, and the needle. So this is a 3 milliliter needle. This is a 23 gauge by 1.5 inch needle. And then our alcohol swab. So from beginning to end, it goes like this. So you invert the Pfizer vial gently about 10 times to make sure that the undiluted vaccine is nice and mixed up. And I'm not actually counting, I just do this about 10 times. So that's all done. So then pull the vaccine caps off, then wipe them with alcohol. Let those dry for a second, and while they're drying, you can put the needle onto the syringe. And they're just the normal screw-on type. I know some of the vaccine packs come with the syringes with the needles already on them. You just screw it on, just like a normal luer lock. So the instructions from Pfizer say to put in 1.8 milliliters of air into the saline vial. I put in 1.5 because if I put in much more than that, some comes squirting out after you get your 1.8 milliliters of saline, and that's kind of annoying. So I just put in 1.5 of air when I drop the saline, and I'll just do that. It's pretty simple, nothing too special with this. So then I just pump in about half of that air so I don't overpressurize the vial. I drop some of the saline here. Like I said, nothing too special with this part, but it is annoying to have the saline squirt out of the bottle when you're pulling the needle out. So then I just make sure that any bigger bubbles are out of the syringe here. So I just draw back on if there's a bubble up here, I draw back on the syringe to grab some air, and then usually the bubble pops at the top. That's an easy way to get air bubbles out of the top of the syringe when you're at this stage. So then I can get rid of the air there and then bring the volume to 1.8. And with these, I just go to 1.8 milliliters. I just go to the bottom of the line, the hash mark on the syringe barrel. And that's what I usually just go to. So that's 1.8 milliliters. 1.5, 6, 7, 8. I just double check that a couple times just to make sure. So that's our 1.8 milliliters of saline. And I already wiped the vial a second ago. So I'll just go ahead and put the saline in the Pfizer vial here. And I usually put the needle like just after the neck area. And I just kind of squirt in about, 0.6 or 0.7 of saline, and then I can grab some of that air. Don't want to overpressurize these vials. And the reason why I put the needle about neck length is there's sometimes liquid, and you can see it right here. There's sometimes undiluted Pfizer vaccine stuck to this right-hand side, or your left-hand side probably. And so I stick it a little deeper so I don't draw that up when I pull the air out. Anyways, so I just go ahead and pump it all in over a couple cycles. And you can tell when there's no more saline left in the syringe because nothing else comes out of that needle. So after I put in 1.8 milliliters of saline, I draw out like 2.3 of air. Otherwise, that same undiluted vaccine can come squirting out of the septum, and we don't want that either. So I just create a small vacuum in the vial by pulling out a little bit more air, and now there's no liquid coming out of the top. And so this can get thrown away into the sharps, and you do your normal vial mixing technique that Pfizer wants us to do. And you do this about 10 times, and that should be good. So now we have diluted Pfizer vaccine that's good for 6 hours. And we'll just wipe it again just to be safe before I draw these up into our syringes. Okay. And I usually lay out 7 needles just to keep track. It's an easy way to keep track of how many doses you get. If you don't get a 7th, you can just write it down. I used to write down all of the counts, but it's a lot easier this way. And so when I get ready to drop the vaccine, there's some lubrication in the syringes, and so I like to work the syringe a little bit before I actually get vaccine, just so it's smoother to the vaccine administrators, make it more smooth for the patient as well. And so I use a different volume of air as well when I drop the vaccine. So you drop 0.3 milliliters of vaccine, and I put in about 0.25 of air just to keep it from getting pressurized, because this should be between refrigerated temperature and room temperature. It's probably closer to room temperature since the normal saline is at room temperature, but it's still kind of warming up. And I notice if you put in a little bit less air, you won't have that little droplets coming out of the top, like I mentioned before. And so there's nothing too crazy with these first 6 doses. And try not to tap too hard, because the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are, I guess, sensitive to shocks, so you shouldn't use too much force to get the big bubbles out. They do say smaller bubbles are fine, so I just tap it a little bit to just get the biggest bubbles out. And then we have 0.3 milliliters of vaccine here. And I also, the top of the plunger is at the 0.3 line, so it's pretty easy. Nice and normal there. And there's really no tricks to doing this until you get the 7th dose. So I have 0.25 of air again. And we just kind of continue to draw these up. And we got the big bubbles out. And I guess you do have to have good eyes when doing this, because as close as you can get to 0.3, the more likely you'll get the 7th dose. Okay, so I'll show you a little bit more detail on the 0.3 mark. So right in here is about where I go with that 0.3 mark. And sometimes, you know, if you can't get a bigger bubble out, you might drop a tiny bit more, but usually try and stick around 0.3. So I've probably drawn up like 400 doses of Pfizer, and I have noticed there's some differences in the diluent syringes. So the ones we're using today are, I guess, more generous in terms of diluent volume compared to other syringes. So I've used BD syringes. These are the DPS ones. The BD, if you use the BD syringes for the diluent, those you can probably get maybe 3 out of 4 7th doses, so like 75% of the time or so. With the DPS, you can nearly get 100% without tapping the syringe so hard when drawing up the doses. You know, it's kind of funny. You can definitely tell when you've had caffeine because you shake way more in the morning than in the afternoon. I had a pretty big cup of coffee this morning, so. Okay, so this is 6, and then I'll show you a little bit more on the 7th here. And then the same trick works, so you have the 2 bubbles there, you just drop a little extra air and they tend to pop together. So easy way to get rid of bubbles that are at the top of that syringe there, just draw in a little air. And that's good. So there's 0.3, and then we have our last dose coming up here in a second. And so, maybe not so much with the DPS syringes, but with the BD diluent syringes, you have to work a little bit to get the last dose. So I just draw up all the volume that I can out of the syringe or the vial, and then I tap it usually to get rid of that big air bubble at the bottom there, and then get rid of the air. And actually this one has extra, but there's a little bit of vaccine here in the neck. So what I usually do is I take the vial and needle, kind of pull it out so that the needle is, a little past, like a little further down than the neck. And you can kind of torque it so that you can grab extra liquid from that corner. And that's usually how I get all the liquid out of the vial. And when you tap this to get rid of any air bubbles, if you don't have the 0.3 dose, any liquid that's at the top, like this one here, will fall down, and it usually gets trapped between the glass vial neck and the rubber septum. So then you can just kind of twist the needle a little bit. You don't want to twist too hard because you might bend the needle, but you just twist it a little bit and you can suck up that vaccine from that, rubber and glass interface there. And that's all I do. So I'll just get rid of this air. And that's number 7. And so, yeah, the part that really matters is if you're able to grab vaccine from the neck portion here, that allows you to get all the volume out, because you can get all the, if there's usually always like 0.2 to maybe 0.3 left in the vial after the 6th dose. So after you get all the liquid out, it's really important that you kind of torque the needle and to suck up the vaccine that's sitting on the rubber, between the rubber and the glass neck. So anything that usually falls down from the bottom of the vial will get trapped there, and it may not actually hit the bottom of that septum. So you do have to kind of torque it to grab that liquid. That's all I do. Tapping your air out of the syringe usually helps to knock that liquid down. And the DPS diluent syringes seem to be a little more generous in terms of the diluent volume compared to the BD and maybe other syringes. And yeah, so you can get 7 doses this way. Well, that's my technique for getting 7 doses out of the Pfizer vials. Good luck getting those 7th doses, and go vaccinate some people.